and we welcome Kevin Wilson to the Book Talk studios today. Thanks for dropping by, Kevin.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Kevin Wilson teaches creative writing at the University of the South and helps run the Sewanee Writers Conference. His short fiction has appeared in Ploughshares and in News Stories from the South, and Ecco HarperCollins has just released his debut collection of stories, Tunneling to the Center of the Earth. Kevin, how did you feel when you first received your retail copy of Tunneling to the Center of the Earth?
Oh, it's a pretty incredible feeling because there's a period of time once I turned in the final draft of about 9 months before the book actually came out, and in that period of time I'd managed to convince myself that it might not actually come out. You know, I kept worrying that something would occur that would prevent that from happening, and so when I finally actually had it in my hands, I could finally be relieved and be kind of proud of myself in some way. And it was also kind of wonderful. I have a 14-month-old son, and when the book came, we opened up the back to see the photo, the author photo, and he points to it and says "Daddy," and that was a pretty incredible feeling. So that I kept opening the book and showing him the picture like every 45 minutes, just so that he would point it out that was indeed me on the back of the book.
How long did you allow yourself to enjoy it?
Day or two. That's about as much as I can enjoy anything, but that was a good day and a half, 2 days.
Now, you have a collection of several stories, and the characters frequently have strange jobs or a college track that's quite unusual. One man works in a noise factory,
Right.
and another has a degree in Morse code. And I don't mean this in an insulting way, but it almost seems like these paths were imagined by a child.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult to think about to make work interesting, even though it's something that we spend like 60 to 70% of our lives doing. We have these kind of boring jobs in a lot of cases, and so I wanted these characters to have these boring jobs, but I also wanted there to be something interesting about it, something strange to kind of give it a little kick. And so these are characters who work in these kind of weird places, like a Scrabble factory where tiles fall from the sky, or a noise factory where they bottle noise. But yet the characters themselves still feel like it's this terrible 9-to-5 job that's just their boring, thing that they do to make money. And so I kind of like the juxtaposition of that, of these kind of really strange, wonderful jobs that the characters themselves don't find strange at all. I kind of took that from, I love Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and what I love about his magical realism is that, for instance, when someone is washing clothes in the river and they suddenly ascend into the sky, everyone else in the river is just, they don't treat it as something strange. They're just pissed that they have to then take over that woman's laundry. And I like that sense of the wondrous things that are around us aren't really that wondrous when you spend so much time around them. And so that's kind of what I was doing with these strange jobs, trying to figure out how to make them strange but also normal to these characters.
And not only their jobs, but there are other strange circumstances that happen in the stories. Now, every fiction writer has to deal with suspension of disbelief, trying to engender that into the reader. And heck, even nonfiction writers are having to get suspension of disbelief going on. Do you think you have to work harder in order to sell that?
Well, I think it's an interesting question because I don't come from a literary background. I spent a lot of my time, most of my childhood up until college, reading strictly comic books and pulp novels. And when you read comic books, the suspension of disbelief is just, it's taken for granted. You just assume that because people are flying through the air or shooting lasers out of their eyes, that the reader just knows going into it that it's going to be this strange world where strange things that don't happen in our actual world occur. And so when I first started writing, that was my background. And so I just assumed that it wasn't a big deal that I would have these kind of weird worlds where people spontaneously combust or, tile scrabbles fall from the sky. I just assumed as a comic book reader, no one would bat an eye at that. And it wasn't until I started thinking a little bit more about how I was constructing these stories that I realized this might be a little strange for people. And then what you have to do is that you hope that despite all the strangeness, that there's a genuine heart beneath that strangeness that will appeal to the reader and that will allow them to kind of work through that strangeness. And that's kind of the difficult balancing act, that you have strangeness, but there's genuine emotion behind that makes it important and necessary. And that's really what I kind of struggled with when I wrote these stories, and hopefully I was successful in some ways with that. But yeah, at the beginning I just assumed that it wasn't a big deal, that people just blew up for no reason. I just thought, yeah, that's just the way it works. This is what would happen in a comic book.
Do you think you're lucky to be in a time post Michael Chabon and Jonathan Fortress of Solitude?
Jonathan Lethem.
Yeah, Jonathan Lethem.
Yeah.
Dealing with comics so much that it's more acceptable in literary circles now?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, sometimes it's strange to hear people like Michael Chabon and Jonathan Lethem talk so reverently about comic books as if they are something more than just funny papers. And for me, I love them because they are so silly and strange and ridiculous. That's what I love about them. I don't go so much into the deeper meaning. I just love that a man is going to fly. He just does it, and no one bats an eye about that. It's just a man flying, and that's what I loved. I thought that was so wonderful that you could do that in fiction, that you could take these strange occurrences and say it's not that big a deal. See, this is what happens. But I'm lucky because those writers basically paved the way for these kinds of stories where strange things happen. I mean, I think you go Stephen Milhauser, and then from that you've got George Saunders and Amy Bender and these kind of incredible writers that, for whatever reason, when George Saunders writes a story about the poor in America, he just inserts zombies into those stories. It's still a kind of heartbreaking story about poverty, but he can't help but put this strange twist on it. And that's really what I respond to and love in fiction.
Do you remember the point in college where you knew literature? Instead of your pulp and comic book past, where the concept of literature hit you and that's what you wanted to pursue?
Right. Well, sophomore year of college, I took a fiction workshop with a writer named Tony Early, who wrote Here We Are in Paradise and Jim the Boy. And he was one of the most formative people in my life for showing me first of all, what contemporary fiction was and what it could be. And from him, he recommended so many books that I couldn't help but read them. I wanted to know how he did what he did, and I wanted to know how all these other writers were doing these incredible things. So it really became an obsession in college that I read everything I could find. And at the time, Granta had released this list of 52 writers who they had picked they then whittled it down to 20 for the best young American novelists. And Tony was one of those people. And so I just took that list of 52 authors and read at least one book by every single one of them. And that was kind of an exhilarating thing to realize, like, here's an incredible writer, here's another incredible writer that I had, months before never even heard of. And so that made me really excited and really happy about the fact that there was so much out there that I had never seen before.
Now, in reading the stories and Tunneling to the Center of the Earth, it seems that so many of the characters have problems getting a handle on their emotions, and that it's this isolation, and that it seems inevitable and inescapable. It's what driving them.
Right. Yeah, there's this desperate loneliness that seems to happen in a lot of my stories, where you have these characters who are alone or feel alone, and the kind of conflict in the story is how they're going to try and rectify that problem. How are they going to be less alone? And a lot of times that blows up in their face and it doesn't work, but there are these rare moments when there's connection, and that's really what I'm trying to find, like, how are these people who are so desperately lonely, who really don't have other people in their lives, how do they go out and then make that connection and find these relationships? And for some reason, that seems to be the thing that I return to every time when I'm telling a story, are these awkward people who wish they weren't alone but don't know quite how to fix that problem. And so what happens is they end up doing strange things because that to them is the normal way to find people. And so that's where the conflict in most of these stories comes from, is that desire to not be alone.
Now, men have always lived lives of quiet desperation over the centuries, but what do you think, in our current cultural climate, what do you think the unique challenges are for the lonely person?
Well, I'm speaking as a person who is, for the most part, feels like a lonely person, and I just think that that because there are more and more avenues to be less lonely, like there's the internet, which seems like this great way to not be lonely, to interact with all these people, and yet it feels so distant. There's not that kind of one-on-one human interaction that I feel is necessary, or what I was trying to find. And so in some ways there were all of these technological things that were supposed to make it easier for me to meet people or to commune with other people, and yet in some ways that felt even more distancing to me. And so that's kind of what then went into writing these stories, was to figure out how do people actually make a one-on-one connection. Like for instance in The Shooting Man, how does Guster make this one-on-one connection with this woman that he is in love with? Or how do these two boys in Mortal Kombat, these two high school boys, make this connection with each other in the face of all the things that say they shouldn't be doing that? And so that's what I was interested in, the kind of physical actions that people take, not these distant or online communities, which I wasn't as interested in. I wanted the actual physical connection of touching someone.
Now, in the story, Dead Sister Handbook, A Guide for Sensitive Boys, the character deals with this loneliness and isolation. He's so inconsolable that he forces himself that his experience, the particulars, are then made universal,
right,
to be truths.
Right.
What was it for you to make these truths universal for him?
Well, that's a great question, and one that I'm struggling to try and figure out how to answer. I think what I was doing with the Dead Sister Handbook was I was originally just I wanted to tell a story of a boy who had lost his sister, who was this formative person in his life, and yet who he really did not know, who was kind of always at a distance from him because of age and because of circumstances. And so I kept trying to figure out, how am I going to do this? How am I going to tell this story that isn't cliched? And then the form occurred to me. I'll make it a handbook. I'll make it that this boy is writing this book for all the other sensitive boys who have lost someone, or who feel this kind of loneliness or desperate loss. And so then that became the way in which the story kind of assembled itself as this handbook written by this one lonely boy who's trying to grieve. And this is the way that he grieves, by trying to save other sensitive boys from this same situation, as if to say, maybe it's universal, maybe I'm not the only person that feels this, and here's the handbook for everyone else. And once that form showed itself to me, then the story became much more interesting than what I would have written otherwise. I think it would have been this boring story about a boy who's crying over his sister, and I think it was the form that made it somewhat different, or interesting to me at least.
Now, the handbook is volume 5.
Right.
What was so particularly interesting about volume 5 as opposed to 1 through 4?
Well, at first I thought, this is going to be this 500-page book, or even a multi-volume thing that I could sell door to door as a leather-bound thing. And then I started just writing down words, that would go in this book. And, from A to Z, I was just writing word after word. Anytime something occurred to me, I'd write it on a scrap of paper, and drug addiction, loss, naysaying, all these different words. I just write them and think, okay, I'll use these later. I'll figure out something for them, definitions. And then when I looked at it, I realized I had a huge amount of words in this L to N area, just of these 3 letters that really seemed to be the biggest number were coming from that. And I thought, okay, well, let me just start here and figure out what I can do later. And then once the story assembled itself as what I think is a finished story from beginning to end, I realized I didn't need to write the previous 4 volumes or the subsequent 12 volumes that were going to come, which I think would have made me a little crazy if I tried to write this entire Dead Sister Handbook, especially since my own sister's not dead, and she was a little creeped out by that enterprise anyways. She kept saying, don't you want to, maybe you wait until I die to write this? And I said, no, I'll just start now, and then I'll be ready when it happens. But I'm glad I didn't have to keep doing it. I think that 1 volume was enough for me.
Now, in another story, The Choir Director Affair,
yes, utilized
the second person, which
right.
is unusual. What about the story in particular do you think called for the second person?
Oh, and I love this question because I particularly love the second person. I find it to be this really strange kind of direct way of addressing the reader. But I also find it sometimes very irritating that when I'm being addressed in a story with this you are going up the stairs, you open the door, I sometimes recoil from that and I say, well, no, I'm not. I'm not going to do that, and I don't want to do that, especially when the story leads you into places that are slightly uncomfortable. And so the way that I thought about this story was I tried to make it less of a second person and more of a first person, where the first person narrator is addressing a character in the story. And so it's a first person, it's the writer addressing a character in the story who is this you. Because this narrator is so upset with the ways in which the character is not doing what the story wants to do, that I felt like the writer would then come in and say, hey, I'm going to have to talk to you now. I'm going to have to set you straight because I'm trying to write this story and you keep ruining it. You keep making it what it's not supposed to be. And so that's the way I kind of did it in my head. I was like, okay, let's pretend it's first person addressing another character instead of second person, and then maybe I can get away with how direct it is and also how bizarre it is, because there's a baby with a full set of teeth and the character is in love with this baby, and I thought people might not go for this. This might not be the thing they want to follow to the end, and so I thought maybe if I can play with what the actual perspective is, it might help. And it's still a second person story, but in my head I thought of it as a first person story, and that made it easier for me to write and do the things that I wanted to do with it.
I don't know if I got the feeling that he was in love with the baby as much as enthralled.
Yeah, well, that's it. He thinks he might be in love with the baby, but really he's just obsessed with these teeth. Yeah, but in some ways there's this worry for the character that he might actually be falling in love with this baby, which of course would be greatly upsetting to realize.
And the you in the story is a friend covering up for his friend's indiscretions, his infidelities. And my favorite line from the book was from the story: "You are doing more with a father than you have ever done before, though actually you just sit at home in your underwear and read orthodontia journals."
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm glad you like that detail. Yeah, it was strange to find out. With that line, I just kept thinking, like, if you were this person who was obsessed with this baby with a full set of teeth, what would you be do? What could you do to? It's not like I hope there aren't websites for baby with teeth that you could go look up. So I kept thinking, okay, well, what would you do to satisfy this curiosity? And so I thought, okay, these, which may not exist, these journals about teeth, you would just want to know everything you could possibly know about these things that are so normal to you, but not normal to a 3-month-old baby. So yeah, that's where that jumped out of.
In another story, The Museum of Whatnot, a young woman is a caretaker of the Carl Jensen Museum of Whatnot, and she receives an odd collection from the estate of William Saroyan. Was he really a pack rat in real life?
Yes. This is one of those stories that usually the stories start with an image or a line that I particularly like and try and figure out how to build a story around it. But this one, it might still be, there used to be a website called News of the Weird, which was actually a syndicated column, I think, in newspapers. And I used to read it all the time. I just loved it. I loved these strange little bizarre stories. And one of them was about how William Saroyan was, had passed away, and they were selling his papers to a university in California, and it was between two universities. But what they also had to take was all of these bags of paper clips and rubber bands and rocks that he had kept for years of his life, that he had just kept collecting them. And I just thought how bizarre and how wonderful that this really incredible mind, this incredible literary writer, still had this kind of compulsion to save these kind of odd but totally mundane objects like paper clips. And I thought, oh, that's just wonderful. I love that so much. And then I thought, well, what would happen to the university that actually took all of this crap that they had to take in order to get the stuff they really wanted, which was the papers? And I thought, it's a shame, like they don't even want this stuff really, they're just taking it to get the papers. And I thought there needs to be a place that would actually love these objects and show them off. And so that's where the idea for that story came, where there would be an actual place that would want all this junk. Yeah.
So 50 years in the future, when your literary career has been heralded by people far and wide, what junk will you try to force on somebody that wants your papers?
We've moved into the tiniest of cabins, and so I had to throw away almost everything. But I have shoe boxes of just like uneaten Hostess pies that I have just kept. I used to just keep everything, that I just didn't throw anything away. And so that resonated with me when I saw Saroyan. I was like, oh, okay, other people do that. Writers do that. Then I'm okay. I'm not as crazy as I thought I was. But then it gets to the point where you can only have so many unopened packages of Hostess pies that are 7 years old in your house before you realize this is not a great idea. This is going to end badly. I need to get it out of the house. And so thankfully moving into this very tiny house with no storage space made me clear out everything. So my papers will just be my papers. There'll be nothing else.
Now, so many people have an image of writers living in New York and walking the streets in Park Slope in Brooklyn, but you live on top of the mountain near Sewanee, and you just have that beautiful view. How do you think that isolation helps you as a writer?
Well, it helps me as a person because I can't function in large cities. I lived in Boston for 2 years and realized that it was pretty much impossible for me to do anything, to leave my house. The smallest of transactions in a crowded space, if there is a line of at least 2 people behind me, I somehow lose my mind and don't know what to do. I forget how to order things. I forget how to pay. I don't know where my wallet is. I can't get on a bus. It just became impossible, and I realized I have to be in a smaller place. And so even though, it would be nice to live in New York because there's so many wonderful readings, there's so many wonderful, things going on, I just couldn't do it. And thankfully I have a wife that feels the same way. And so we live out in the woods in this little cabin out on a 1-acre pond, and we see nobody for a long time. And that helps because I'm pretty prone to being lazy. I'll watch a lot of TV. I'll look at videos online. I'll read comic books before I ever think about writing. And so living in a place that doesn't give me many options, there's one restaurant in Sewanee. There's not much to do. And I feel like that's necessary, or else I might never write. So I needed that small town in order to kind of keep me writing. And it's worked so far.
So it's so strange that a person who's had so many issues with loneliness has to go be isolated in order to get his work done.
But now I've got my wife. I just needed one person, I realized. I thought I needed hundreds of people, but I just needed one. It was just the right person. So it's worked out.
It's a strange choice, I think, on my part, but I think my favorite character in the book was from the Museum of Whatnot, and it was the mother. Such a small character.
Yes.
But just as no nonsense as a person could be in the entire book.
Right. I mean, in some ways, she's one of the few voices of reasons in this collection where she actually thinks about things logically and can make decisions that will better a person's life. And so often, that's part of the reason she's a great voice. And in the end, I think she does have some effect on her daughter of at least trying to think about how not to be such a messed up person. And in all the other stories, usually there isn't that voice of reason. There isn't a person saying, you need to think about what you're doing. This is not correct, and you're going to be unhappy. Those characters don't have that mother. And so that's what gets them into all of these situations where they become incredibly unhappy or things blow up in their face. It's because they don't have either an internal voice of reason or this wonderful mother who will just cut to the bone and tell you what you need to do. They don't have it. And so they're kind of at loose ends. And I love that mother too. I mean, she got only a few lines, but I could have written pages and pages of her, because eventually I surround myself with these crazy characters, and every once in a while even I get upset with them. I think, what are you doing? We need to fix this. And so the mother comes in, and she knows exactly what to do, and I kind of loved her for that. And I thought, all my characters need a mother like this to kind of save them. So yeah, I loved her too.
Because she was the opposite of the parents in Tunneling to the Center of the Earth, the title story.
Right.
Do you think those parents allowed their child and his college graduate friends to do this tunneling because they're self-absorbed and they just couldn't be bothered to do anything? Or did they not want to crush his spirit? Or
I think they very much love their son. They have this boy who I believed was probably a real struggle even to get him to go to college and then to finish it. And they were probably so proud of that. And he had his diploma that if he wanted to take a few years to dig tunnels underground, they were not going to ruin anything. They were just happy that he was functioning in some way. So I think that they loved him so much that they just wanted to let him have his time to dig his tunnels underground, which I believe is probably what my parents would do for me. If I had started digging tunnels underground, I think they would just say, let's give him a year. Let's let him have this year to dig tunnels and see what happens. And then maybe we'll worry, but not just yet.
Now, your parents do seem rather supportive. Your father is your chauffeur on your current book tour.
Yes, he's driving me from place to place. I was surprised. I said, this isn't going to be a ton of fun. We're going to be doing a lot of driving. We're going to be sitting in hotel rooms. You're going to have to hear me read the same thing over and over again. And he wanted to do it. And I don't like to drive, so it worked out perfectly, yeah. And he has been incredibly supportive. Both of my parents have. I went to Vanderbilt, which is not an inexpensive college, with the hopes of getting a paying job that would be a good thing for me. And then 2 years into it, I tell my dad, I think I want to write. I think I like this. I think this is what I want to do. And he didn't hesitate. There wasn't any hesitation. He just said, "That's great. If you like it, I think you should do it." And both of my parents have been incredibly supportive. My dad's one of the first people that reads anything that I write, and some of the more bizarre stuff, I give it to him, and he's happy with it. And that's a kind of wonderful thing, to feel like you're writing this strange stuff that no one might like, but my parents liked it at least. I mean, if you can't have that, then I feel like you're really not doing well. But they've always been super supportive.
Now, it's unusual for a new author to get a story collection deal without having a novel tied to it. Are you working on a novel right now?
I am working on a novel, yeah. And I mean, as much as they like the stories, and I was very proud to be with Ecco, who I think is an incredible publisher. They definitely wanted me to take that next step and write a novel. And I understand that because I know that novels sell better than short story collections. That's just the way it works. But I also wanted to do it because I want to see if I can write a novel. And there are so many books that I love. There are so many novels that I think are incredible that I wanted to see. Is this something that I have in me to write one? So it was I signed the contract, so I was gonna have to do it. But I was also happy to try it. I want to see, if I can.
So what's the state of progress on that?
It's I started writing one that I thought was pretty good. I got about 150 pages into it, and then it just kind of died, kind of emphatically died, with no hopes of saving it. And my agent and editor were both very supportive. They just said, "Yes, this is dead. You should give it up, but start with something else." And I went a little crazy thinking, what am I going to do? I'd spent 2 years thinking up this idea, and then I just took a month and started over. And what I have now, I think, is much, much better. I think it's much more similar to what I'm doing in the stories, and they're really happy with it. So I'm about halfway into it. It's due at the end of October. I think I'll get it. As long as I don't kind of lose it, I think I'll be all right.
And so do you think it'll be published a year from this October about?
Let's say a year from now. I feel like we're going to go back to this interview and this book won't show up for 7 years or something, and I'll feel awful. But yes, it would be a year after I turn it in.
Kevin, we're just about out of time, so we're going to thank you for coming by Book Talk today. It's really been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate being here.
Kevin Wilson's book, Tunneling to the Center of the Earth, is available from Ecco HarperCollins. And you can also catch this program as a podcast at www.wyplfmbooktalk.blogspot.com. I'm Stephen Ussery, and this is Book Talk.
You're watching the Library Channel, a broadcast service of the Memphis Public Libraries and the City of Memphis.